But it's the work of George Herbert Mead that really provides the jumping off point in the development of a theory of social self. For Mead, the self is clearly a product of human communication. It derives its social nature from human communication, and it's built on symbolic gestures. The individual carries out an internal conversation of gestures, and through that, the self is constituted. Meaning for Mead is an interactive process. It's a conversation of gestures. All meaning emerges out of the communication interactions that people have with each other. Humans use significant symbols in their communications with one another, and Mead has this to say about these significant symbols. The importance of what we term communication lies in the fact that it provides a form of behavior in which the organism or individual may become an object to himself. Mead felt that true communication requires the use of significant symbols, and he suggested that as one thinks, that is, as one carries on an internal conversation using symbols, the self is constituted out of that. So it follows for me that entire societies emerge out of the social and symbolic interactions that occur between individuals, all the cells, individual cells that take part in the myriad of different social groupings that ultimately result in society. Because the individual participates in many different social groupings, the society that results has to be thought of as always emergent, as always contingent, always in process. For Mead, of course, the self is not there at birth. Rather, it is emergent, it's built out of social interactions, and as a result, it's endowed with meaning that can shift over time. Now, interestingly, Mead and Cooley really focused on the emergence of self through play in childhood. As children play at taking on different roles, they are learning the attitudes, the behaviors typically taken towards a specific stimulus. They later learn to understand all roles in a group. So first they start with just one role, then they are able to take on multiple roles and understand the relationship of one role to another role and the proper attitudes that they should take on when adopting a specific role. Mead argued that learning through play in childhood is vital to self-development. When children play at different roles and groups, they learn the attitudes that one typically takes towards a particular stimulus. Now, Mead calls the accumulation of attitudes associated with all of the roles in a group the generalized other. But the self is not simply the analog of the generalized other, as individuals are capable of being critical of their society and the roles in the society. So a significant characteristic of the self, according to Mead, is its capacity to be an object to itself. To explain how this works, Mead famously divided the self into two phases, the I and the me. The I is the response of the individual organism to the attitudes of others. The I is the capacity for reflection on the generalized other. It's part that is free and undetermined. The me, on the other hand, is the organized sets of attitudes of others which the individual himself has assumed. Here, the generalized other presents itself in the individual experience as the me, the way one sees oneself formed from the perspective of others. So the I is always associated with becoming, and therefore with novelty and surprise and a capacity to descend. The me, by contrast, involves looking backwards, considering what has already transpired, and then evaluating one's response from the standpoint of the expectation of others. The self is a process of adjustment and adaptation. The I of this moment is present in and reflected on by the me of the next moment. The self, for Mead, is a constantly flickering alteration between the I and the me.